I'm going to talk about vegetables and fruit. I'm not talking about flowers or anything like that. I'm talking about pest, disease, nutrition, and storage. Now, these are my own views. I should say that my background is commercial agriculture, I hate to say, and there's a lot of technology about commercial agriculture, some of which you would not like. But there's also, in actual fact, a gardener has a much bigger trouble than commercial. We all see these commercial producers as very technologically great, but they've got an easier job. So what I've assumed is that most people who want to grow in a community on allotment want to grow organically with a minimum of chemicals. And you can get me right if that's not the case. From background, for farm potato crops, they get 10 to 15 sprays, blight sprays, every season. So this is what the technology is talking about. I don't think you'd be happy to put on 10 to 15 blight sprays in your farm crop. The second thing is a guy I knew, Mr. Farker, who was a market gardener in St. Swithin Street. It's now covered in houses, but he had an allotment or plot there, and he had one out of town, south of Portlethen. And he said to me, he said he was packing in the one in town because he couldn't produce vegetables. He sold the vegetables to the general public, but he couldn't produce vegetables of a proper quality from his town plot. He could from his country plot, but it was such amount of disease. And if you think of all the gardens with all the vegetables and fruit and things around, that you got a huge pest and disease challenge. So that's what you have to cope with. The third thing is I've looked on Google and to see what the potential production in allotments and community gardens are. And the potential is huge. But when you look for what is the actual production, the only reference I could get was one from Jay Rayner, who's a food journalist. And all he said was, and then there's allotments and community gardens, UG. So what UG thing, I don't think it was, he didn't say wonderful, but it was UG. So I think there is a serious issue. We all want to grow nice vegetables without chemicals and all the rest, but it's quite a hard job to do. We really want, you can go into B&Q and there's all sorts of chemicals and things. But as I say, we're trying to avoid that. So as a mechanical engineer, basically, and an agricultural engineer second, I think that mechanical pest control is probably better. So what I use, and for to save my bacon, really, with carrot growing, is a 3mm mesh, which excludes root fly from your cabbage, from your carrots, or from your cabbage and so on. And that's white cabbage and butterfly. And basically the mesh allows the sunlight to come in, but it keeps the insects out. And before I used this, I could never get a crop of carrots in my garden. I have to admit, since Adam is here and saw them, that I used slug control pellets. If I didn't use them, I wouldn't have a crop at all because they munch away. The carrots are slow to germinate, and the slugs and snails have a field day. In terms of ecology and so on, the netting stops birds and all these things coming in. So it is a sort of a microenvironment so that various animals and things that might eat the slugs and don't get a job. But what I've said here is that we need you need 2 or 3 net systems so you can have a rotation, because you must go for crop rotations, and that's quite difficult in a small area. I made it on a frame, but mostly when you use these mesh, people put them over hoops and you dig the edges into the soil. But that makes thinning, weed picking up the weeds a bit of a task. So I made it on a sort of hinge system. With strawberries, I just got a frame available, but just yesterday I put on the wide mesh to keep the birds at bay. We've got a nice group of pigeons who just sit around waiting for the next feed. So this is to keep them and some of the other birds away. When it comes to potato growing, as I say, blight is a big issue, but in actual fact, there's a window, because blight starts, it depends on the time of year, but by the end of June, it's usually coming. So if you plant your potatoes on the 15th of April, I should say that in the College of Agriculture where I used to work, 15th of April was the key planting date. I think probably with climate change, it's maybe come a bit earlier. In fact, if you plant it on the 15th of April, you can get small, tasty potatoes before the blight arrives. So you've got a window there. The third thing, though, is this potato cyst nematode. That this is a really serious disease. The people like the James Hutton Institute and so on, they are frightened to death of this thing, because it can build up in the soil, it gets onto the roots of potatoes, and it can completely destroy the soil. And this is one of the things with allotments and community gardens. In a farm, you can do a test. It'll cost you whatever it is, 40 quid a test, and that's one of the costs of growing in agriculture. If you do that, you'd be better just buying the potatoes in Tesco. So you're a bit blind because you can't do all these fertility tests and so on. So this is what makes it very difficult. Compost management. What I've got here is a rotary composter, which we put in our food waste into. We don't really have much food waste, but it's potato peelings, it's carrot peelings, odd bits of onions and things. And you just feed it in and turn the drum round so that aerates the compost, and you get amount of rotting, so that when after about 3 or 5 months, I take it out and put it into the main compost area, which is on the bottom. And the advantage there is that the material becomes unrecognizable as whatever it is. And if you put on food waste into your compost heap, it doesn't look very nice. And I have to admit, I put some, like the turkey bones after the stew for making soup. I shove it in there as well. And because it's a closed system, that even circus rats can't get in. So it's completely sealed from rodents and so on. And the bottom part is the sort of New Zealand compost bin, which the one on the left is the compost for next year's. We made it last year. It's working away this year, and it'll be ready for my potting compost for growing tomato plants and so on, and for putting in. I grow tomatoes in compost because it doesn't allow disease to develop. So that's my nutrient or my growing medium. and the compost, which is over that, goes into the rest of the garden. Some people were talking about, having big piles, if you got a lot of grass, it won't compost well. You've got to have a right nitrogen to carbon ratio. And so nitrogen you can think of as green and carbon as brown. You've got to mix that up to get, because basically you're designing a ration for your sound bugs, your worms, all your microorganisms, and you're making a meal for them, and they need it to be a balanced diet. And so you got to, if you just put a pile of grass in a heap, how much time was?
You're over 10 items.
Oh, that's right. Okay, I'm nearly finished. And so you got to mix the two up and make sure you're going to balance diet. And the size of the allotment and garden, allotments I checked on the web. The Aberdeen allotment is 250 square meters. That's 60 meters by 60 meters. It's huge. I don't know whether that's still the case, but even a half allotment is huge. If you have to start digging that over, and then you got to deal with the composting, it's hard work. The bigger the plot, the more work it is. So I do wonder whether these allotments are far too big. With a communal compost heap, in fact, CFINE offered me a project to look at community composting, and they did the project with somebody else because they were cheaper contractor. But I've never seen any of them really working well, because you may need a tractor to turn the stuff, or the problem is that your neighbour Fred sees it as a waste bin, and you see it as a nutrient source. And so you get also these bags of stuff here and bits of wood and so on, and you're trying to make your ration for the next year. The last thing is, if you pile your tatties into a compost heap, they can keep this blight and not only spread blight to you, but to spread it to all the neighbours. This is a question, where should you store carrots? Where should you store parsnips and things? They need about a relative humidity of 98% and a temperature of 4 to 10 degrees C. And where would you think is the best place to store them?
Soil.
What?
Soil.
Soil. Good. He's clever. Yeah, the farmers are, they store the carrots in the soil. If it looks like frost, they put some straw over the thing to keep the frost out. But the soil is the best place. Potatoes have got a thicker skin, and so you can store them, you can lift them and store them in a deep cellar, a cool cellar if you can, in the dark, obviously. Yeah, okay, right. Like sharing with stories of fruit. If it's the problem is you get a bumper year crops, and sharing is wasteful because everybody has the same thing. From the freezers, you can store in the freezer. It costs, in electricity terms, £1.50 per annum, and if you buy plums in the supermarket, £2.35 to £5.48 over the year. So it's worthwhile doing. It's bottling, juicing, and soup making. Not soup making. So the take-home message is, this is for Rachel. Allotments, community gardens are for community involvement, mindfulness, fun, and for teaching kids agriculture. They're not really to replace to give you production for the whole year. Don't overestimate how much ground you can physically cultivate. Plan how you're going to utilize leafy veggies and fruit in bumper years. Think about it beforehand. Get your freezers organized. And you have decide who you're going to give the veg and things too. And use fine mesh for insect control and coarse mesh for protection against birds. And store groups in the roots in the ground and avoid PCN buildup in the ground from potatoes. Okay, that's
Thank you very much, Bob. Okay, can we stop recording?